Hey, it's Guy Raz here, and welcome to the YouTube channel for my new show, The Great Creators. Every week, I have conversations about creativity with some of the greatest artists and musicians and performers of our time. In this week's episode, I'm talking with songwriter and music producer Oak Felder. He's collaborated with some of the most incredible pop stars, Nicki Minaj, Demi Lovato, Alessia Cara, and Lizzo. And to Oak, being a producer is more than just writing beats or programming hooks. He's building a space that allows artists to magnify their emotions through their work. And he's kind of a combination shaman, therapist, and musical chameleon. Before we get started, here's what you need to know about Oak. He was born in 1980, the child of an African-American father and a Turkish mother. And he was actually raised by his mom in Istanbul, a period in his life that he remembers happily, but he also remembers kind of feeling a little out of place. So without further ado, here's my interview with Oak Felder. Enjoy.
I might have been 3 or 4 years old, noticing that the people around me didn't necessarily look like me. Add to that I'm 6'5" and 400 pounds. I'm not a small person, and that
Were you always big?
applied.
Were you always tall?
I was
as a
always
kid
a big
too?
person. Oh yeah, even as a kid.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is that I see that reflected in my son. My oldest son is 8 years old, and he's the tallest 8-year-old I've ever met, besides myself. Sort of looking around and seeing that everybody looked different, and including my mother. And I remember asking her, Mom, why does everybody look different than I do? And she sort of, she did the thing that mothers do. She made me feel better about it. And listen, don't be ashamed of who you are and how you look. You come from a rich background and a rich culture. And she always made me feel lucky to sort of have multiple cultures to draw upon, being Turkish and being Black. And that's one thing that she really focused on as I was growing up. The flip side to that, though, is that Turkey's interesting in that it doesn't really have a context for the history of Black people.
Yeah.
It doesn't really understand, what the issues are and what the struggles are and what the stresses are, as it relates to being a Black person. So for them, it's all about what you see entertainment-wise. It's, we see these basketball players that are out here killing it.
Right.
It's all these Black basketball players. And you see these movies, these movie stars, and growing up, I think that I became the focal point for that perspective. So literally, if there was any issues that I had from a self-esteem standpoint of not looking like everybody around me, that was balanced by the fact that everybody around me was so fascinated by me. And I would always be the topic of conversation. People would always want to talk to me about things. I think it actually helped my personality because it made me feel more comfortable being an outgoing person, even though I can be a little bit of an introvert. And to this day, when I go home and I'm walking around the city, people might not necessarily know who I am from what I've accomplished as a producer or being in the entertainment industry. They'll just see me as a Black man and be in wonder and say, hey man, can I take a picture with you? The funny thing is that when I took my kids back home, that started happening to them too. Random people would stop us and say, hey, can we take a picture with you guys? And it's this, I think in some situations you might view that as a little insensitive.
Right.
But, and I had to explain this to my wife, there is no context for that negativity in Turkey. There's no understanding that, pointing out the difference might be a little insensitive in the United States. Oh, there's a Black person
Right.
That's taboo here. If you did that'd be a whole problem. But in Turkey, it really is a form of reverence. And it comes from an ignorance, but it also comes from an awe. And I
Yeah.
understood that at a really, really early age. I understood that being a black person in a country with essentially no black people sort of made me a unicorn in a lot of ways.
Yeah. As a kid and a teenager, I know your dad, he wasn't really around when you were growing up. He was living in the U.S., and your mom is Turkish, and so you were immersed in Turkish culture. You spoke Turkish. You didn't, from what I read, you didn't fully speak English, which is unbelievable to hear you now until you were like in your late teens. Did you in any way have a Black American identity? Was there any way for you to cultivate that through music or literature or food or art? I mean, was there any way for you to be exposed to it?
Well, my father, first of all, he wasn't in the U.S. growing up. He was in Germany for the most part.
Oh, he's in Germany. Okay, right, because he was in the military, right?
Yeah, he was in the military, and there was contact, especially with my brother, who, to be honest with you, is the person who sort of exposed me to a lot of the culture that I was exposed to growing up.
Is your brother Dennis?
Yeah, my brother Dennis. Yeah, I'm actually going to see him in a couple of days. I haven't seen him in a while, so I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, my brother D. He, sort of growing up in a military environment with pops, with my father, was really the main sort of catalyst for whatever I was to be exposed to on a Western level. It was a struggle. It was a bit of a struggle growing up because, okay, let me rephrase that. It would end up being a struggle culturally for me to have grown up in a space that didn't really give me a lot of outlets as a black man, as a black person. And what outlets I did had primarily came from my brother. And I can honestly give him the credit for, whatever interest I have in music in general, because my brother was a musician from a young age. So a lot of the stuff that he and I sort of sent back and forth to each other and spoke to each other about really influenced me in, going in whatever directions that I went into, especially jazz. My brother grew up listening to a lot of jazz, and he's a sax player, fantastic musician. And he would send me, Grover Washington CDs, and he would send me like really just stuff that would end up, inspiring me.
So from what I understand, from like remarkably from a pretty early age, like 8, 9, 10 years old, you had an uncle who was like a recording engineer. He was he worked in a studio.
Yeah, no, actually, he was a producer.
He's a producer, yeah, and he would take you to the studio. Yeah,
I grew up in his studio. It's funny to me how things that you totally take for granted when you're a kid are so special. And, the rarity of being in a working recording studio in Istanbul in the 1990s, in the 1980s.
Yeah.
And to me, it's just a childhood memory and something that, of course, every kid grows up in a studio. Every kid knows how to, learns how to cut 2-inch tape. Every kid knows how to use a console and understands, how you should set your speakers when you're mixing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing because it happened that's you would go to recording studios with your uncle, but you would go on to pursue like computer science and computer networking. Like that's what you went to study in college. That's presumably what you thought you would do.
Yeah. You know what? Growing up, Turkish mom, you're either going to be a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. That's what you're going to be. Every Turkish mom wants to say that their kid, is doing one of those three things. The closest thing for me that made sense was, computer scientist. Because then at the very least I could say I was an engineer. And that's sort of what pushed me in that direction. Of course, I've always been comfortable around computers from an early age. And people sort of take that for granted now because computers are so pervasive in our lives now. But, you got to think, late 1980s, late 1990s. I built my first computer in 1990. I was 9 years old. It was made out of a green chassis, and it was a 386 system. And I don't, a lot of people aren't even going to remember what that is, but it was an 86 architecture system, and I put it together, and I still have that computer. I call it the Green Machine. It's actually sitting right over in the corner here in my studio.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And from that point, from learning how it felt to be able to put that technology together, and then to have people afterwards say to me, "Oh my God, you put together a computer, you're a genius." Remember, it's Turkey. Everyone wants to look interesting, right? So what better way to look interesting than to make people think that you're a genius, right? So here's my computer that I built, everybody. And so I was really interested in technology in general. So that's what led me in that direction, to be in computer sciences.
You came here to study computer science at Caltech, at Georgia Tech. I mean,
Georgia
you went
Tech.
specifically, right? I mean, I guess that was your plan, that you would come and you moved specifically, from what I understand, to Atlanta because your dad had been living there at the time.
Yeah, my father was in Atlanta, and it was important for me to make sure that I had a connection to him. And so my mom encouraged me. She encouraged me to go do that, which I'm very thankful to her for. But yeah, ended up going to Georgia Tech for networking technology with a focus in artificial intelligence studies.
Wow.
Which, to be honest, is a lot less. I mean, it's complex. It's a complicated field, but it's not as. It's literally not rocket science, right?
Yeah.
But it was a field that I was immensely interested in, and the concept of it really fascinated me. So,
When you got to the United States and in the city and to Atlanta and Georgia Tech, probably, I mean, I think it's fair to say that Atlanta's now, and even then, was the most important Black cultural city in the United States.
Oh, yeah.
Certainly, you can make a case for that today. I mean, certainly in the 90s, like L.A. Reid, who you would go on and meet, I mean, he had a whole label out there, right? LaFace, and he was producing all of these Atlanta artists, and all these huge stars are coming out of the city, and there was a whole hip hop sound that was emerging when you were there, really when it was just starting to explode, right? And so you're at this sort of the center of this cultural capital, like global cultural capital, certainly around Black culture, Black global culture. And what did you think? I mean, did you because you're a Turk, right? And you're a Black American Turk in this Black Mecca. What was that? What do you remember about that time? What do you remember? Sort of, did you understand that? Did you start to see that around you?
What's funny is that there's a parallel between how I viewed music in general and how I viewed Black culture.
Yeah.
My experience in the United States started in Atlanta, right?
Yeah.
So I'm thinking this is the standard. And this Black culture looks like this everywhere in the United States.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter where you go. Of course, there are more Black radio stations in Atlanta than there are any other radio stations. Of course, there are more Black radio stations everywhere else in America than there are than there are white stations or any other types of stations. Man, it was weird living in Atlanta. My mannerisms and the way that I spoke and the way that I was as a person and my interests and stuff like that were all informed by being raised in Turkey. Yet I'm still a Black man, right? So I'm still a part of the group, as it were. But man, when I first moved to the States, there were a lot of people who looked at me in the same way that people in Turkey looked at me as a unique individual that didn't act or look like anyone else. But in the States, there was a bit of a negative bent to that. It was, man, why are you so weird, bro? Like, why do you talk like that? what? You listen to Rage Against the Machine? Yo, who listens to that? That was a bit of a learning curve for me because all of my interests in black music, like I mentioned before, came from the older set of stuff, right? So I'm listening to soul music, I'm listening to gospel, I'm listening to jazz from the 60s and the 70s. So when somebody says to me, yo, take a listen to this JT Money album that just came out. And it's like, I'm like, JT who? So that was weird. And it was a hell of a learning curve for me as a black man in general.
What do you remember listening to at that time? In 2001, I mean, Outkast is obviously huge and would become, considered to be one of the greatest hip-hop outfits of all time. I mean, what do you remember being exposed to at that time when you arrived and listening to and just sort of music that kind of opened your world up?
Yeah, for sure. The southern aspect of hip-hop really, really interested me. So there was Outkast, there was Pastor Troy. I don't know if anybody remembers that person. He was real big in the South, but I don't think he did anything outside of the South. There was Pastor Troy. There was this came later. It was Young Money, Cash Money Billionaires, which of course is the place that like Baby and Lil Wayne and the rest of them came out of. And then there was Master P and the stuff that he was doing at the time. We were listening to a lot of that stuff.
I think what's interesting to me is like you were really lucky that you landed in Atlanta. Like if you decided to go to MIT, right, in Boston,
oh my God,
or like Caltech, your life might have been totally different. Like you, in a sense, the fact that you chose to go to Georgia Tech in Atlanta, it meant that it was going to have an influence on what you would become as a producer and an artist.
That's true. Even as a person, living in Atlanta really informed the black side of my personality, which is not something that I developed fully until after I moved to Atlanta. It just wasn't something that I had to think about as much when I was in Turkey. I mean, I had to think about it because I was so unique, but that was really the only aspect of it that was front and center. Atlanta and being in Atlanta and being in the South in general really, really, really taught me. And it was later in life for me. I didn't move to the States till I was 21. So, it's a late period to realize your identity as a black person. I was already a discerning music listener and sort of judging this, to me, new feel and new style of music, based solely on how good I think it is as a 21-year-old person, which, tends to be a little bit more critical, right? So the things that I gravitated towards weren't things that I was that I would have a natural inclination to gravitate towards because of my upbringing. It was more, oh, wow, this is really dope. This sounds cool. Oh my God, Outkast, like I said, being one of them, man. God, that Rosa Parks record was so good. That came out a little bit before I moved there, but yeah, I am lucky in that regard because it made me regard urban music and black music with a more critical eye. And it allowed me to sort of extract what I was going to end up extracting, what ingredients and what styles and what vibes that I would end up extracting to use as a producer later on.
That would happen, obviously, as it does for any artist at an unconscious level. It would take you years, and now we're talking about it, to reflect on those moments. And I'm curious about how you, as a music lover, right, but a computer guy, like somebody who had a computer-oriented mind and was working in that direction, what was the catalyst that got you into thinking about the convergence between computers and music, that you could maybe go into a studio and help people make their sound better? How did that even happen?
It didn't start with that thought at first. I was broke and I didn't have money to go out and buy the consoles and the tape machines, and I guess at that period, 2001, what was being used, like ADAT tapes, right? I didn't have the money to go get the ADAT decks with the tapes that look like VHSs. And I didn't have that money, so it's like. But what I did know how to do is build cheap computers out of cheap components, and so I found what was the name of that computer store? Comp USA. I found a store
Comp
called
USA. Yeah.
Found a store called Comp USA and bought all the elements that I needed to update the computer that I had, because I brought my Green Machine with me from Turkey. Updated it, put new stuff in it, a new hard drive, all that stuff. Fired it up and told myself, there was a period in my life living in the States where I was so homesick and I was so... Like, you're not going to find Turkish restaurants in the States. Turks tend not to leave Turkey. Like, you might have met like 8 Turkish people in your life in the United States. We tend not to leave. So there's not a lot of Turkish culture, especially in Atlanta. So I was homesick and I needed to feel connected to something from when I was younger. And so the only way that I could figure out how to do that was to build a computer and put some recording stuff on it and maybe do some harmonies or something. Like, it started off as something just really small. And I built this computer, and it was an old PC. And I remembered I had been using Notator Logic that entire period as a program, initially because my uncle needed me to convert MIDI to staff paper notes and stuff like that. And that program was used for that purpose. And then eventually it developed into a sequencer that allowed you to do some vocal recording, wave recording rather. And I knew that I could get a copy of that program for free. I knew that I'd get a copy of that program for free. So I did. And I put it on a computer and I literally just started recording harmonies just for fun. And that was just a way for me to reconnect, to not feel as homesick and sort of, put myself back into that medium of music that I sort of grew up in and was so familiar to me. And that really went from there.
I mean, so you're really it's kind of just a hobby. You're like a hobbyist, basically,
exactly right.
Kind of messing around with these sounds and the computer and creating different sounds. But that hobby eventually turned obviously into what we're going to talk about more, which is what you do now. And I guess it was, you met this guy named Sterling Sims.
Yeah, Sterling.
Who wanted to legitimately record a real legitimate demo. This is like 2005. So you're like 24, 20,
I'm like
you're
24 years old.
You're a kid and not a professional yet.
No.
But somehow you sort of got together and you're like, yeah, I'll produce your demo. Tell me how that happened.
I had progressed from making it a hobby to people noticed what I was doing and just wanted me to make music for them. It's Atlanta in 2001. Everybody wants to be a rapper, right? So I'm doing like 1,000.
So friends had talked about you, or people had met you, and they're like, "Oh yeah, this guy Oak, he's making really great stuff, or check it out."
Yeah, that's exactly right. And people wanting to do R&B, people wanting to do rap music. Everybody around me was like, "Man, you can record stuff and you can produce stuff." And I guess at the time I didn't realize. Yeah. I mean, I understood that it was a special thing, but I didn't think it was that special. And then my brother, who lived in Atlanta at the same time, convinced me that it was special. He's like, you can do that. You can do that. And not a lot of people can do that. Like, I play sax, I'm a musician, but I don't have the wherewithal to sit down and actually do the technical part of what it is you do. And the thing is that, like I said, growing up and being into the technical aspect of it really gave me an advantage. And so I determined, being broke, that it would not be a bad idea to make some money doing it, right? So I set up, I pressed a CD of beats and I made 100 copies, and then I went to places that I knew where there would be a lot of people who wanted to be musicians, and I passed it out, and I basically sold packages. It would be like, you'd have the CD, and if you found a track on there that you liked, bring it to my studio and I will finish the production for you, help you write the song, record it, and then mix it, and then burn it to a CD for you so that you'd have your own demo to showcase. And I did that at $500 a song. I charged $500. And this buddy of mine, this girl named Yuloma, who I don't know if her and Chastity are, I think her sister is still a songwriter today, but her sister was a songwriter and she was managing her sister at the time. And she knew this guy, Sterling Sims and Chuka Maduakor. And the two of them came to my studio. She introduced me to them, and they came to my studio. And so we ended up making a song called Welcome Into My World, which grammatically I think is not right. Welcome into my world. Can you say that? Welcome to my world is the way that you would say that. But
Welcome to my world.
Yeah, but I remember the hook being welcome into my world. Like I remember the hook being that. And so we ended up writing with what at the time, 2001, this was or 2004, 2005 was a fantastic song. And I remember going, wow, this is really cool, man. We should do this more. Like I could do this for fun. I'm not going to charge y'all for this. And so Sterling and Chuka came back and we ended up doing like 4 or 5 records. And those records were some of the best things that I have ever made up until that point. And up until this point, I'd done hundreds. Really cut my teeth on doing those commercial sessions with people who didn't necessarily have the talent. And so my job was to pull the talent out of them and put it in the music. And I got really good at doing that in that period. But working with Sterling, I didn't have to do that because he was so naturally talented. He still is. He's naturally talented. He'd never admit it today, but he's still a naturally talented musician, in my opinion. And it was just so cool. And we did the project, and we did like 5 or 6 songs, and it started getting a lot of attention. And I want to say 6 months to a year later, he calls me and he says, hey, do you want to meet L.A. Reid?
Like, L.A. Reid, the biggest at the time, biggest record executive probably in the U.S. He's the guy he discovered TLC and eventually Meghan Trainor, Pink. Legendary.
No, legendary executive, legendary
record label.
Producer. Him and Babyface had LaFace Records together, but even before that, they were producing for people like Karen White and Tony Braxton, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Tony Braxton,
So, yeah, but at the time when he said, do you want to meet L.A. Reid, guess what my response was? L.A. who?
Yes.
Because, listen, I was into the music, right? The business part of it. And even though I was becoming a producer, my interest in other producers wasn't as strong. It was really more the more visual aspect of the music, which was the artist and the music itself. So when I said L.A. who, he's like, what the fuck? What's wrong? Oh, excuse me. Can I curse on this?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Right, no problem.
He was like, man, how do you not know who that is? I was like, well, the name sounds familiar. He's like, yeah, you wanna come to New York and you wanna meet this guy. So ended up going to New York. And my computer, my networking career was already in full swing at that point. I had a decent job. I was making decent money.
Working for like a tech company?
Yeah. Working for a tech company. I mean, it was an entry-level job, so I wasn't making a whole bunch of money, which is honestly why I started doing the supplemental production stuff too. But get to that point, go up to New York. I'm sitting in the room with him, playing the music, and he's like, yeah, Sterling's going to be a star. And this music is incredible. I want to buy this music from you. I'm like, oh man, yeah, that's great. That's awesome. And he's like, yeah, I'm going to pay you $6,000. And remember, I'm charging $500 a song at this point.
You're like,
are you going to pay me?
Your eyes are popping out of your head.
Pay me $6,000 for 5 songs? Are you kidding me? He's like, no. I want to pay you $6,000 for each of them. And I'm at that point, I'm like, you know what? I might need to consider a career change. So, yeah, that's where my professional career started.
I want to get a sense of how you think about producing a song. There's an artist, and this artist comes to you and they say, okay, I want to make something. So let's talk about Alessia Cara, for example, because, this is a breakout artist, huge hits. I mean, Scars to You're Beautiful, Here, I mean, you can go on and on. The song she did for Moana, you were involved in all of those. This person comes into your studio and says, hello, I'm Alessia Cara. Hello, I'm Oak. What do you do from there? How do you begin that creative collaboration? What's your yeah.
I am lucky to be the servant of the artist. That's how I look at my job. And one of my favorite things is when someone finds out that I produced something and they go, "You did that?" It's one of the biggest compliments I can get, because I really think that if there are producers who are artists, Pharrell, Timbaland, and I think that they can afford to have a specific sound and imbue that sound onto another artist's music. But I think a real producer who is focused on production and not necessarily being an artist, I think that if you have a signature sound, you have failed your artist. And people disagree with me about that. I've had arguments about this, but artists are artists. They have their own sounds. Your job is to give them what you think is a better version of what they are and what they have. Alessia Cara told me what her influences were. We sat down. It was actually me, her, and her dad. The three of us sat down in front of the recording studio that we worked at. And we were just talking about the things that she listened to and the things she was into. And the good thing about her and a lot of people her age at that period, their musical interests were so varied. Like the genres that they listened to, ranged from, country to hip hop, right? So it's like, let's use a little Taylor Swift vibes in this, and let's use a little Lorde vibes in this, and maybe a little breakbeat hip hop vibes in this, and let's really put together something that's unique to you.
You see what you do as an interpreter of this person's vision, right, and taking that vision and really shaping it, and not imposing your specific sound, but essentially introducing ideas that you have that would really elevate this piece of music.
Yeah. I can give you an example. Alessia mentioned to me that one of her biggest dreams is going on stage and having the crowd sing with her.
And she was unknown when she said that. She was a 15-year-old.
Nobody knew who she was.
Unknown.
And so one of the songs she had played me was Scars to You're Beautiful. She had the chorus. And the way that, there's a hope that's waiting for you in the dark. And she's singing this chorus, and the way that was structured, she would go from the chorus right into the second verse. And I'm thinking to myself, no. This chorus melody is too good to just let it be words. So why don't we give you like a section that's literally just the melody over again, but it's a phonetic. It's not a word. Let's do that though after the chorus. And as a cue to everyone who's listening, why don't all of us just pile into the booth and we all sing it at the same time? So, when you listen to that song, it's me, it's Sebastian Cole, it's Pop Wenzel, Alessia herself. I think Tab got in the booth too.
You are on there singing. You are the backing vocalist.
Yeah, you can hear me in the backing vocal. Yeah, like trying to get up there in that range. And it's a cue to the audience. This is the part where you sing. Now,
wow.
Having seen her perform, I saw her open for Coldplay. That's an enormous, it was literally the Rose Bowl. It was huge. And she's singing the song, and then she gets to that part, and she takes the mic and she points it out to the crowd, and the whole crowd starts singing that part. And I'm like, okay, that's
wow.
I did what I set out to do.
I'm curious when there's a famous Brian Eno has this famous thing that he used to do, and he kind of codified it into a deck of cards called Oblique Strategies, which I once purchased these cards, and it's a deck of cards that he uses or used in the studio when people were stuck, and it would be like, everybody switch instruments. Like everybody just like John, Paul, George, and Ringo. No, not them, but whoever's in the studio, right? David Bowie, you go on drums, and Mick Ronson, you go on vocals, just to get people to out of their comfort zone, especially when they were stuck. Right. The thing is, we hear Scars to Your Beautiful or Sorry Not Sorry by Demi Lovato, and we just hear a great song, a complete finished song, and like it either catches us right away or maybe a couple listens in or it doesn't, and we love it and it goes to the top of the charts, but there's no way for us to understand how much sweat goes into pushing that. It's like mining for a little nugget of gold, right? It could take years and all of the layers, but all of the just time sitting and waiting for something to actually inform that song. So what do you do in the studio? What are some of the things that you do to kind of ignite creativity, especially when you're stuck?
I do a lot of things. I think that creativity comes from comfort. This studio, I don't think people can see it, but it's a really comfortable space. Like there's this huge couch in the background, and there's books everywhere, and it looks like a fun library. If that's a thing, a fun library. Is that a contradiction in terms?
No.
My focus is making people as comfortable as possible and get them as far into the creative process as I can without them realizing that that's where they are. This actually happened yesterday. I was working with an artist, and something really traumatic had happened to her at the beginning of the year. And it was myself and, believe it or not, Sebastian Cole, who I still work with to this day, even after doing the Alessia Cara stuff. And the two of us were sitting here with her, and she's going through the process of explaining to us, what happened to her. And as she's doing that, I'm sitting and I'm plucking out chord progressions, but it looks like I'm just noodling around sort of absent-mindedly. And after that was done, I had the chord progression and Sebastian sang the hook. And there it was. And she was like, oh my God, like you just sort of pulled my experience into this music. One of my other producers, a guy by the name of Oscar, had a really dope guitar loop that we also added to it to make it work. So I guess the key is to be as prepared as we possibly can be to allow for that creative process to sort of happen for the artist. And it happens 1,000 different ways. There's no such thing as being creatively stuck, in my opinion. I think that you can always have a creative idea. It's just putting you in a position where it's easier for you to be. Some people want to feel less judged, and that makes them more creative. Some people want to be pressured, and some people really react to negative pressure, and those people create in the best way that they can. And so you give them that negative pressure, and I know how to do that too. So to be honest with you, I don't think there's a such thing as creatively stuck. That, and as a random aside, I found that purple and blue lights are really good for creativity. Something
I'm gonna think about that.
Something about the psychology of it. Yeah, something about the psychology of purple and blue makes people like fire better creatively somehow. Which is why the lights in here are always that color.
One of the things I read about you, which really I connected with because I identify with it on so many levels, despite how long I've been doing what I do, and the thousands of people I've interviewed, I get nervous before every interview. I do feel pressure because I want it to be the best interview I've ever done. Doesn't matter who. Yesterday I talked to Graham Nash, last week Stephen Colbert and Jimmy Fallon, and but it doesn't matter. I want them all to be meaningful for me and for the guest and for the audience, most importantly. I want and I feel that even with all the experience I have. And I read that you feel that.
I do.
And as a result, you go into the studio overly prepared. You really prepare before you go in. And I'm curious about your preparation process. What do you do? What does being prepared mean?
Oh, every producer has a palette of sounds that they use for whatever artist. If if you're a producer who's worth his salt, in my opinion, you understand what that palette looks and sounds like for each artist you work with. And it's different. It's different for every artist. The sounds that I would use for Demi Lovato and the concepts that I would use for Demi Lovato are totally different than the concepts that I would use for Alessia Cara, or the concepts I would use for Nicki Minaj or Cardi B or whoever else. Understanding what that palette is and how it's been established up until this point is paramount. Before I worked with Demi Lovato for the first time, I spent a solid 2 weeks listening to every song she'd ever put out. I mean, aside from the songs that I was already aware of, like La La Land, et cetera, but I spent every waking moment that I had listening to every single song and really taking the time to recreate the sonics of those songs. Listen, some of that made its way into Sorry Not Sorry, which is why that song is not a complete foreign body for her. Because it does have some connective tissue to her past material, and that's important. Having said that, though, man, I was nervous before that session. I was just as nervous before that session as I was before the session I did yesterday. And I'm going to tell you why I'm nervous. You said that you're nervous because you want it to be the best interview you could possibly make it. And I'm here to tell you that you have nothing to worry about because you're pretty good at this. You're pretty amazing at this, man. But for me, I think that a producer's job, much like an interviewer, is to take the story that's there and make it presentable to an audience. And God, you want to do that justice. You want to do that justice. You never want anybody to walk away from that moment saying, I wasn't able to tell my story. You and I have that in common. So having said that, I'm nervous before each session because I'm afraid that all the preparation that I've done won't matter if they walk into the room and we do a song and they leave and they feel like they weren't able to tell their story. And one thing that my unique experiences has taught me as a person, man, is that everybody's story has a side of it that is just fascinating and can serve to teach and help someone else. Someone literally messaged me before saying that scars to your beautiful convince them not to kill themselves.
Wow.
So think about the importance of allowing Alessia to tell that story. And imagine if I had failed to help her tell that story. What would have happened to that person that messaged me? That's how critical it is.
I mean, music these are the contours of our lives. Like when we hear a song, it triggers a memory. It can trigger a memory from age 5
That's right.
or younger. I mean, it has this incredible emotional resonance. You've said, I saw it in this TEDx talk you gave, that a song, in order for you to feel like you have created something of value, that song has to be a conduit of emotion from me, the artist, to you. You see your job as helping to create that emotional connection between artist and listener.
Yeah. There's this space between how you feel and then the words you use to express it. There's this space between those two moments. And that's where the true emotion is. It's before you formulated how you feel into words. That to me is music. I think the endeavor of creating music is creating that moment. There have been times when I've listened to songs and not understood why. Oh, there's this song, God, I forget who does it. It's a gospel song, and it was recorded in an old church back in the 60s and 70s, and it's the song called Nobody Knows. And I don't know why, but I'm even getting emotional thinking about it. Whenever I hear that song, I'm brought to tears. And I have no idea why. I wasn't raised in a church. I like gospel music, but my emotional connection to gospel music isn't the same as, say, somebody who was raised in a church, I would argue. But just something about this song, especially this one specific part of it, makes me burst into tears. And I don't know why. But something about the creation of that song imbued in it this emotional message, this emotional energy that I am perceiving. And I think that's our job as creators, as music creators in general, but as producers specifically. When I sit down and I talk to somebody about a thing that they've been through and I really analyze how they feel about it, my question to myself is, how can I convey this idea, this emotion, even if there were no words in this song, even if there were no lyrics, just musically? How can I make a person feel as sad as this person felt when they wrote the song? Like, how do I do that? And unless I can do that, I think that I've failed. Which is another reason why I get nervous before every session, because I know that the likelihood of me doing that to 100% efficiency is not very likely.
And obviously there's a range, right? There's a range of emotions. It's sadness, it's joy, it's inspiration, the sassiness of Sorry Not Sorry. When do you know? When you're helping to build this song out, on Sorry Not Sorry, you are also in the backing vocals. In your voice is I think you're saying I'm not sorry, and it's going through auto-tune in that song. There's part of that, right? That sort of computer sound. That's you. When do you know that it has done that? Like, you hear Sorry Not Sorry, and it's just it's sending you a message. You don't even have to listen to the words, because it's sending you a message. You know what that song is conveying. It's conveying strength and confidence and a little wink. How do you know that you've done that?
There's this thing that happens with artists. It is this, how can I explain it? It's like you shine a light at the mirror. You shine a light, and then you put a mirror in front of it, and then the light shines back and reflects off of the light, and then the light goes back to the mirror, and it goes back and forth, and it reverberates. There's this magnifying effect that it has with the artist. The artist walks into the room and they say, I really want to convey this, and I feel like this, and I'm confident. I want people to know that, et cetera, et cetera. But then we do the song, and you notice that emotion in the artist has magnified, and you see them jumping around the room, and I'm that motherfucker, and you see all that confidence come out. Yeah. And in that moment, I realized, we did it. We did it, because if that emotion wasn't being reflected back to her, this resonant effect, this magnifying effect wouldn't be happening. It would be us sitting around the room going, this is good. This is good. And usually when you're just sitting around a room going, this is good, it's probably not good. So that's kind of how I know when the intention is magnified. That having been said, I've been in sessions where a person, was not in a good place and really wanted to convey that. The thing about reveling and magnifying negative emotion is that it tends to have the opposite effect. You put yourself through grief and you feel intense grief. And then after that, there's sort of I think the word is catharsis. Yeah, catharsis. Yeah. There's like a catharsis that happens and people feel better. And it's like, I've done it. This person has effectively gone through a therapy session with me creating this song, and it's really helped them, realize what their grief is and how it feels. So that's kind of how I know. But you know what? You don't really know until after it's come out.
But one of the things I wonder is it that elusive? Do you think creativity is this unreachable force that is only available to the Oak Felders of the world and the Demi Lovatos and Alessia Caras, or do you think it's actually a practice that people can tap into?
I believe that creativity is accessible to everyone. I think everyone is creative to one extent or another. I think that my challenge is not necessarily creativity. It's resonant creativity, which to me is a different thing.
Right.
Anybody can make art, and anybody can put it up on a wall. Anybody can take a white canvas and put a black dot in the middle and name it desolation and call it art. And that's creativity, right? But resonant creativity is a different thing. Can you put something on a wall And a year later, 1 million people are coming to see it because there's something about it that make it something people want to see. And today, the term for that is how viral a thing is. I would argue that the concept of virality, if that's a word, I'm making it a word if it isn't, the concept of virality has always existed. It is the thing that makes a thing popular. The story behind a thing gives it virality. But here's the thing. Resonant creativity, I think, is not something we can necessarily control. I think we're creative, regular creative, and then we happen upon something that is resonant, and then we learn all the attributes of this thing that made it resonant, and we try to guess, and then we apply that to the next thing that we create. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And we take away the things that didn't work, and then we apply it to the next thing that we create. And before you know it, you've created a string of hits, or you've created, a gallery of art that's sold for $10 million a piece. It's become resonant to the people who want to, put themselves in a space to experience it. I think resonant creativity is, like I said before, is something that already exists that we have to become conduits for. And if you want to believe in God or the universe or whatever it is, I think it's the universe sort of dropping this idea into me saying, this will resonate. Just do it. The thing you have to do, though, is make yourself open to that. And so I think you can teach yourself how to do things approximating that, but you can also teach yourself to be open to receiving that type of resonant creativity. I know that sounds weird. And left as hell, but yeah, that's honestly how I view it.
That was hip-hop and music producer Oak Felder. By the way, you might have noticed some of those overhead lights in Oak's studio during our conversation. He actually told us that in his experience, those purple and blue lights actually help his artists feel more creative. So you may want to give it a shot. To see the show notes for this episode and links to Oak's work, head over to thegreatcreators.com/Felder. You can browse through all of our episodes right there at thegreatcreators.com, and be sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel so you won't miss all of our future videos. I'm Guy Raz, and this is The Great Creators from Built Up Productions.